Thanks for the intro, John. Good to see everybody after almost about a year. I'll just get started with a quick intro. Like Stu, John said, I'm a software guy. Been in the industry like 20 plus years. I was at a startup that got sold to Oracle. Then I bootstrapped an enterprise IT consulting business in the government space to like $1 million plus in revenue. And then now I'm looking to build on Filecoin. So I'll just get started by like talking a little bit about my ESPA and Filecoin journey to date. Like John mentioned, I joined ESPA in Cohort 1. Actually, maybe I'll rewind back and kind of like talk about my like Filecoin journey as well. So like I started researching IPFS Filecoin in like 2017 when I was in the crypto rabbit hole, super exciting tech. And then like I was in the Filecoin ICO, and then like I was tracking everything till mainnet. Then I really wanted to get involved, right? So I saw ESPA, applied. Thankfully I got in the first cohort, and I didn't know anything about data center management or the storage business. So this was a way for me to learn more about how the storage business works, how data center management works. And through ESPA, I gained that knowledge. And while understanding the storage provider business as a Filecoin miner, I saw that there's a lot of needs. I mean, there's a real need for infra tooling that doesn't really exist for someone to bootstrap a storage provider operation. So that's what this is going to focus on. So I'll get started. This slide kind of talks about the current state of storage providers. As you guys are pretty intimately familiar with the space, at the moment, the main use case for Filecoin storage is the archival tier, right? So, in order to set that up as a storage provider, at a software orchestration layer, you have to set up your Lotus node, Lotus miner, sealing node, so forth, in order to commit some capacity, and then onboard storage through like FillPlus, Slingshot, et cetera. To support that, there's already like some level of tooling in the ecosystem, right? Like SidGravity for like deal management, Aligned is trying to provide sealing as a service, Glyph provides like a JSON RPC endpoint, and Boost provides deal making. Boost is another deal making tool provided by Protocol Labs, so forth, right? So this, even for the current state of storage providers, there's like a growing ecosystem of tool providers. But as a storage provider, you have to pick and choose which tool you want to use, how you want to use it, how you want to bootstrap your operation, and manage your operational challenges, right? So I stole this slide from one of these Juan Benet presentations. That's sources underneath if you want to take a look at it later. But this is where it's going, right? Like, so right now you can store data for archival purposes, but you have retrieval markets coming online, indexer nodes that you could run, and then you could run compute over data, right, through Buckle How and other projects as well, right? So with all of that, so this increases the complexity, the management complexity of a storage provider, where like you're not just running a Lotus miner and a Lotus node and the sealing service. Like now you have like more complexity even at the software level, and then you have complexity of like acquiring hardware, making sure it gets delivered at the data center, colos, so forth, and then like bootstrapping that hardware to provision your software layer, right? So so as you can see, like there's already challenges now. I'm going to use like Sean and Cognos Cloud as an example. Like, with the challenges of like running an SP on your own, in some ways it makes more sense right now to like work with Picnic as a service, right? Like, So there's a lot of challenges. So maybe like digging into like some of the challenges of being a storage provider, right? So the first 3 bullets here are related to like hardware challenges, right? So like acquiring hardware, like JBODs, storage solutions that you need, CPUs, GPUs, so forth, and then you have to like identify and partner with like data centers or colos, build your own or like, rent some space. And then like the lifecycle management of commissioning and decommissioning your hardware, right? Like we haven't even gotten to that point where like, storage providers have gotten started, they're still in their like, 5-year life cycle of their initial hardware that they're using, but at some point, it goes end of life, and then you have to decommission that and then commission new hardware, so forth, right? So there's like challenges at like the physical infra layer, and then that's coupled with like challenges at the software layer, right? Like, once your hardware is validated, and then you have your like initial storage provider set up, you have to figure out how to manage and scale that. You have to onboard services onto it, like storage, retrieval, indexer, compute over data, so forth, right? So, so how do we help storage providers reduce this operational overhead and manage these challenges, right? What if storage providers had a high-level orchestration layer for their physical and logical infra? What that effectively means is if your supply chain was tied, your supply chain management systems were tied to some sort of a signaling mechanism when like hardware gets delivered and docked at these data centers and wired up, right? And then past that, there's some sort of a remote boot setup which allows you to orchestrate the software layer on top of it, and you can manage all of this end to end through some sort of a workflow engine. I thought that'd be super compelling. So with that said, I talked about the network boot software, and then you can also use a templating mechanism to create and manage your storage provider nodes. What I mean by that is, for example, your Picnic, you've set up your first data center with like 2 bare metal servers. You have your like ceiling and miner nodes running on there, and you've kind of set it up in a particular setup. If you could effectively templatize that in such a way that like that infrastructure is in some like XML file or JSON file, right? That you feed to a workflow engine, and that actually orchestrates the same setup for you at another data center or colo, right? Wouldn't that be like super useful? And then you obviously want to add like monitoring and logging, right? Like everyone's using like Prometheus, whatever else, like setting it up, on their own. There's no like common setup process, standardization. So like troubleshooting has you have to kind of handhold whoever you're getting help from, even if you're getting help from them. So there's all these challenges with being an SP. So that's what I wanted to propose here, a product idea for a workflow engine. I'm calling it BaaSP now, but that name may change. So calling it, Bootstrap as a storage provider. Open source workflow engine, which allows SPs to do low-code, no-code management of their DevOps process. And then allows for idempotent execution of workflow steps to build fault-tolerant processes. What that means is, let's say you're setting up your storage provider infra in your data center. You have like a 2-server setup that I mentioned earlier. You set up your Lotus miner and maybe some other service, and there's a power outage, right? And then like the setup for the second server just got started, and your ceiling service was like getting set up, and you got a power outage. What if like you had to start out from you first had to figure out like you have to figure out how to recover some hardware failures, and then get started with the workflow from the start again, and then go through the whole process, right? You don't want to be doing that. Idempotent execution of workflow would allow you to identify which steps of the workflow already finished previously, and pick up where things left off prior to the power outage, so that you can finish the workflow from that point on. And then you can persist your workflow state running in these workflow engines locally in IPFS or through Filecoin SPs. So let's say like your workflow orchestration got started, and like at every checkpoint, you're saving the state of that workflow somewhere, right? You could save it locally in IPFS and also back it up in other storage providers and say, hey, like, we're at this checkpoint. We, in case there's some sort of a failure, we have backup copies with these SPs, right? And then, allow recovery from that. And then you can introduce standardization, right? Like you can have standardized templates and dependency injection-driven DevOps. Like I talked about, if you have like an XML file that defines your topology of like, or your infra, right? Like of how your storage provider is set up with, 3 data centers in geographically dispersed locations, 5 colos, whatever else. If all of that is an XML file, and this workflow engine could like help you bootstrap that, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to build. And then also add modular framework for doing this in such a way that you as a storage provider can build additional custom workflows for running some additional workloads that you yourself might have. So for example, if you're running nCloud's TEE environment, right, to set that up, you could have a workflow for that, right? So these were features, but what does that allow SPs to do, right? That allows SPs to be more self-sovereign, right? So as an SP, you could host the BaaSP node yourself in your infra and bootstrap your infra on your own, or let's say you're just getting started, you find this to be overwhelming, you could use a larger SP who's using BaaSP internally to orchestrate your provisioning process in the beginning, so that they can set you up, and then you can choose to run BaaSP on your own or continue to use their orchestration process. So if something like this gets adopted community-wide, right, like you can get ecosystem support from anybody, right? You'll have like consulting business that could be built up, so forth, to troubleshoot deployment, operational issues. Yeah. So yeah, the go-to-market slide is kind of weak right now. I'm just in the customer discovery phase. I'm talking to storage providers to see, what the challenges are with bootstrapping these, small, medium, large operations. And then like phase 2 would be to like come up with like checklists for setting up these SPs to turn into workflows. And then come up with like a baseline set of workflows that like is common for setting up like a 1 pip, 5 pip, whatever setup, right? Based on the current state of Filecoin, which is providing that archival layer at the moment. And then using those baseline workflows to build that workflow engine with those baseline workflows, for bootstrapping and setting up a storage provider. And then phase 4 is what I would be super interested to build, which would be a network of decentralized workflow nodes, right? Obviously, like you have to think about the monetization side of things and so forth. But again, like I'm trying to think of this as like a phased approach, right? Like I want to get through phase 1 and 2, get buy-in from some storage providers, and then go further from there. So yeah. So I mean, what kind of opportunities could you have with this sort of a workflow engine? Obviously end-to-end management of your storage provider deployment. Once you have retrieval nodes coming in, indexer nodes, compute over data nodes that you want to run within your environment, makes it seamless to orchestrate that using a workflow engine. I mean, there's a term called zero-touch provisioning, right? Zero-touch data center provisioning, where like you don't have, or maybe you have a data center technician, but like they don't ever touch the hardware after it gets wired up, right? That's kind of where you want to be with your infra as a Filecoin storage provider if you really want to compete with the hyperscalers at some point, right? So yeah, so that's the obvious opportunity. And then there's, if something like this does get adopted, and you can, folks like the idea of that, templating mechanism where like you have your topology defined in some sort of an XML or JSON file, and the workflow engine uses that to bootstrap your storage provider. You could build the Terraform for Filecoin, right? So you have a CLI that takes in some parameters, spits out a JSON or XML file, right? And then the workflow engine takes that as an input and bootstraps your storage provider. So like in the XML, you can define, hey, like, here's how you connect to my bare metal server, provide some sort of an IP. You provide additional data about, the core attributes or parameters you'd need to do the orchestration, right? So, so you could build the Terraform for Filecoin, and then you could build a decentralized network of workflow nodes that could be used not just to bootstrap storage providers, but to kind of set up blockchain nodes, right? That's kind of like where things could go. Yeah, so that's all I got.